I was standing beside the gleaming mahogany casket, my fingers tracing its edge like it might steady me, when my cousin Mark leaned in so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. His lips barely moved, his eyes never leaving the crowd of murmuring relatives. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Grandma's affairs are already taken care of. It was such an odd thing to say at that moment, at her wake, of all places, that I actually thought I'd misheard him. But then he gave my shoulder one slow squeeze, the kind meant to look comforting, but felt more like a warning, and drifted away into the cluster of uncles near the coffee urn. What did he mean? Taken care of? Taken care of by who? And why say it to me now, with her lying just feet away? I scanned the room, my mind racing. Our aunts were arranging trays of cookies in the back. Cousins I barely spoke to were embracing and dabbing their eyes. Mark was laughing softly at a joke someone told, perfectly composed, as if we hadn't just shared that strange, loaded moment. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat. I'd been the one living with Grandma these past few years, making her tea at night, driving her to appointments, paying the utility bills when her pension ran short. Mark lived across town, only visiting on holidays. So why was he talking about her affairs like he was in charge? Every conversation that day felt fuzzy, my brain replaying his words. By the time the funeral director dimmed the lights and let us out, I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go. If there was something Mark wasn't telling me, I was going to find out. I just didn't expect the first clue to come from the very history that made me trust him in the first place. Shall I write the next chapter? Mark and I weren't just cousins. We were practically raised like siblings. His mom and my dad worked long hours, so the two of us spent most school vacations together at Grandma's house. We built blanket forts in the living room, raced bikes down her steep driveway, swore we'd always have each other's backs. That bond didn't fade, even after we grew up. When my life fell apart after my job loss and breakup, it was Mark who suggested I move in with Grandma. "It'll help you both," he'd said. "You can be there for her, and she won't have to be alone so much." He even offered to help sort her bills when I told him I was nervous about taking on the responsibility. At first, it was comforting. He knew where every paper was, which account covered what, even which pharmacy gave her the best deal on prescriptions. I thought it was just him being organized, maybe even trying to make up for not visiting as often as he used to. And he was good at reassuring me when I felt overwhelmed. Anytime I panicked about a late notice or a confusing insurance statement, he'd say, "Don't worry, I've got it handled. Just focus on keeping her healthy." It was easy to trust him. I remembered all the years we had each other's backs, the way he defended me from a bully in middle school, the secret birthday party he planned when I turned 15. Family loyalty ran deep, and Mark had always been the one person in the family I thought would never betray me. But looking back, I realized that comfort was exactly what made me overlook the first subtle signs that something wasn't right. And those signs weren't as small as I thought. Shall I write the next chapter? It started with the envelopes. Grandma was meticulous about her mail. She'd line it up on the kitchen counter and open each one after breakfast with her reading glasses perched low on her nose. But slowly, certain bills stopped appearing. The electric company, the water bill. I figured maybe she went paperless without telling me. But when I asked Mark, he casually said, "Oh, I've got those covered now. Less for you to worry about." Then there were the oops moments, a bank calling to confirm a withdrawal she supposedly authorized, or a pharmacy saying her payment method had changed. Each time, Mark had an easy excuse. "They mixed us up with another account," or "It's a tiny glitch, these systems are awful." He'd fix it on the spot, smiling like it was no big deal. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found him shoving a wad of torn-up papers deep into the trash. When I asked what it was, he laughed. "Junk mail, nothing important." The sound of that laugh, a touch too quick, too dismissive, stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. It was too small to accuse him of anything. I told myself I was overthinking it, maybe making drama where none existed. After all, you don't just suspect your own cousin of shady behavior without real proof. But the nagging unease crept in, tiny cracks in the wall of trust we'd built. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. And that silence was exactly what let him rewrite the next chapter behind my back. Shall I write the next chapter? When I finally worked up the nerve to ask him straight out, it was after another mix-up. This time, a call from the community bank saying our joint household account was short. I'd deposited my own paycheck just the week before to cover groceries and Grandma's utilities. So there was no reason we should have been overdrawn. I waited until Grandma was napping in her recliner, TV humming softly, and found Mark in the kitchen pouring himself coffee. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady, "have you been taking money out of the account without telling me?" For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then he gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Wow, you really need more sleep. You're getting paranoid from stress." "I'm serious," I pressed. "It doesn't make sense otherwise." He cut me off, setting his mug down with a sharp clink. I said, "Relax. I've been covering things you probably haven't even noticed. Do you even know how much those new meds cost? You should be thanking me, not accusing me." The ease with which he flipped the script made my skin prickle. Suddenly, I wasn't a concerned co-caretaker. I was the ungrateful, dramatic cousin making wild accusations. And without proof, any confrontation would spiral into a he said, she said in the family grapevine. Mark picked up his mug again and walked away, muttering something about people creating problems out of thin air. I tried to let it go, to convince myself he was right, that maybe stress was twisting my perspective. But that fragile piece shattered the night of Grandma's birthday, when he decided to make a grand gesture in front of the entire family. Shall I write the next chapter? Grandma's birthday had always been an understated tradition. A home-baked cake, tea in her favorite china set, and maybe a scarf or book from each of us. But that year, when Mark strode into the living room carrying a velvet gift bag the size of a small suitcase, every conversation stopped. He handed it to her with a flourish, glancing at me sideways as if performing for an audience. She reached in and pulled out a glossy envelope, frowning a little before sliding out its contents. A thick packet of documents bound neatly in blue ribbon. "I've been working with a lawyer," Mark announced, "so you don't have to worry about anything anymore. All your assets will be secure." There was an appreciative murmur from our aunts and uncles. Someone even clapped. I stood frozen. That was my job, mine, to help manage her care and keep her finances in order. But here he was, planting the idea that without him, she'd be adrift. He was staking his claim publicly, and nobody seemed to see the undercurrent. Grandma smiled politely, but looked confused. She set the papers aside and reached for the cake. Meanwhile, Mark launched into a story about helping her streamline accounts, charming everyone with his diligence. Not one person questioned why he was taking over responsibilities I'd been handling for years. I kept my mouth shut, cheeks burning. Confronting him in that setting would make me look hostile and petty. Exactly the image he wanted. But as I watched him soaking in the admiration, a hard truth settled in. If I didn't act to protect Grandma's rights, decisions would be made without me. That's when I began forming a plan. One that started with making sure, legally, that I could speak and act on her behalf. Except Mark wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Shall I write the next chapter? The next week, I sat with Grandma at the kitchen table and gently brought up the idea of making me her medical and financial proxy. I framed it as a safety net, Just in case she couldn't make decisions, I'd be there to ensure her wishes were honored. She listened quietly, nodding along, a faint smile on her lips. "I trust you, dear," she said, patting my hand. "If you think it's wise, let's do it." Relief bloomed in my chest. It felt like I was finally doing something concrete to protect her from whatever Mark was maneuvering toward. I called the attorney's office that same afternoon to set up an appointment. But the very next day, Mark appeared unannounced, breezing into the kitchen like he owned the place. "I heard you're trying to shuffle paperwork around," he said lightly, pouring himself a drink from the fridge. "Wouldn't it make more sense to loop me in? We don't want to confuse Grandma with too much legal jargon." When I told him the appointment was already booked, he frowned. "Oh, that's not going to work. I can't make that time, and I've got relevant financial records she'll need there. We'll reschedule." Except every new date I proposed was bad for him for some reason. A work commitment, a last-minute trip, a scheduling clash with a lawyer. Days turned into weeks, and each attempt to move forward was somehow derailed. Meanwhile, he made increasingly frequent visits, leaving with slips of paper and unopened mail in his jacket pocket. I started to wonder if he was deliberately running out the clock, buying time until some change was made that I didn't know about. Then, one rainy afternoon while tidying up Grandma's desk, I found something that made my stomach drop. Proof I couldn't ignore. Shall I write the next chapter? It was tucked under a stack of old greeting cards, barely visible, a manila folder with the handwritten label, Estate. I almost put it back, thinking it was just Grandma's original will from years ago, the one she'd mentioned briefly when I first moved in. But curiosity won. I slipped the papers out and began scanning the crisp legal pages. The first few paragraphs seemed familiar. Her name, address, the formal language about property, and last wishes. But then my eyes caught on the list of beneficiaries. My name wasn't there, not as a proxy, not even as a recipient of the modest savings account she'd always told me I'd inherit to get back on my feet. Instead, the assets were divided between Mark's 2 children, both still in high school, and a vague line about additional distribution to executor's discretion. And in bold print at the bottom, the executor named was Mark. I flipped quickly to the date at the top, 2 months ago, which meant while I was busy taking Grandma to doctor appointments, cooking her meals, and keeping the heat running through the winter, Mark had been in a lawyer's office quietly cutting me out. My hands shook so hard, I almost dropped the folder. There was no way Grandma had intentionally done this. She was sharp for her age, but her trust in Mark was absolute. If he told her she was signing something to simplify things, she'd believe him without question. I stuffed the papers back into the folder, heart pounding. This wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was proof. But proof was worthless if I couldn't act before more changes were made. That sense of urgency only grew the day I saw, with my own eyes, where Mark had been going all those times. He couldn't make the proxy meeting. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened by accident. I was driving back from picking up Grandma's medication when I spotted Mark's car parked outside a low brick building downtown. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe he was at a coffee shop nearby. But as I slowed, I saw the sign clearly. Harlow and Webb, attorneys at law. Something in me snapped. I pulled over half a block away and waited. 15 tense minutes later, the door opened and there he was, stepping out with a leather folder tucked under his arm. The same dark green gold embossed style as the one I'd found in Grandma's desk. He didn't see me, but I couldn't take my eyes off how casually he checked his phone and climbed into his car, like handling the future of Grandma's estate was just another errand between lunch and the gym. All the pieces were locking into place now. His conflicting schedules, his sudden generosity with gift-wrapped legal work on her birthday, the hidden will without my name. He wasn't just meddling, he was engineering the outcome. And unless I confronted him before he finalized everything, my role in Grandma's life, and her wishes, would be erased permanently. That night, I barely slept, replaying scenarios in my head. Would he deny it? Would Grandma believe me if he did? Would the rest of the family take his side because his version fit the charming, dependable man they thought they knew? By morning, the decision was made. It would have to be public, undeniable, with proof right there on the table where no one could twist it. And there was only one place I could pull that off, right in front of both Grandma and her lawyer. Shall I write the next chapter? I called Mark early the next week, keeping my voice calm. Grandma's been asking questions about the will, I lied. She wants both of us at her lawyer's office to go over everything. Thursday, 10 a.m. Silence, then a measured reply. Fine, if it'll put her mind at ease. That Thursday, the sky was a cold white, the kind that makes shadows look sharper. I drove Grandma into town, her hand warm over mine on the armrest. She seemed a little puzzled but willing. She'd always valued transparency when it came to family matters. The lawyer's office was quiet, the lobby perfumed faintly with leather and coffee. Mark was already there, leaning against the reception desk, folder in hand, smile fixed. He greeted Grandma warmly, but his eyes flicked to me, searching for my angle. Once we were seated in the small conference room, I waited for the lawyer to settle in. Then, without preamble, I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 folders. One was the will I'd found hidden in Grandma's desk. The other, an older copy from years before. The one listing me as a beneficiary and assigning me medical and financial proxy authority. I think, I said, laying them side by side, we should all be looking at the same documents before any more changes are made. Mark paled just slightly, his jaw tightening. Where did you get that? From Grandma's own desk, I said evenly. Funny how this version, the one from 2 months ago, removes me entirely, but doesn't mention she'd intended me to help manage her care. Almost like someone made those choices for her. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Grandma, eyes wide, reached for the papers with trembling fingers. She read, then looked at Mark. Did you... Mark, why would you change this without telling me? He opened his mouth, but whatever excuse he was about to give died in the weight of the silence. I had exposed him, but what happened after took the whole family by storm. Shall I write the next chapter? The news spread faster than I could have imagined. By dinner that evening, 3 different aunts had called me, their voices tight with disbelief, each of them having already spoken to someone else who'd heard my side, or Mark's. Mark wasted no time spinning his version, that I'd misunderstood, that Grandma had wanted to simplify the inheritance, and that I was lashing out because my free ride living at her house might be ending. And because he told it with that calm, capable tone of his, people listened. By the weekend, the division was obvious. Some cousins sent me texts saying, "You did the right thing," while others stopped answering me entirely. At Sunday dinner, the tension was so thick you could choke on it. Mark sat at one end of the table, I at the other, the air between us crackling with unsaid things. Then came the blow I didn't see coming. Grandma, clearly exhausted by the drama, told me she thought it might be better if I stayed with a friend for a while to let tempers cool. I could see Mark's subtle satisfaction in the tilt of his smile, the way he avoided meeting my eyes. Moving out of the only home I'd had in years felt like losing not just shelter, but my role in Grandma's daily life. Each box I packed was another piece of proof that winning the confrontation hadn't automatically secured the outcome I wanted. Mark was still a presence in her ear, and finally had me physically out of the way. But as bitter as that was, I didn't realize something was still in motion behind the scenes. and months later, it would turn out that Mark's victory wasn't quite as complete as he thought. Shall I write the next chapter? It was 3 months before I saw her again. The space had been good for my sanity, but brutal on my heart. Every day I worried whether Grandma was safe, whether Mark had tightened his grip even more. My calls to her were brief and often interrupted. Mark always seemed to be just walking in when we spoke, the background noise of his voice reminding me he was still there. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, she called me. Not Mark. She called me from the old landline phone in her kitchen. "Can you come by tomorrow morning?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't from weakness. "There's something I need to give you. Just you. Don't tell Mark." When I arrived, she met me at the door in her cardigan and slippers, her eyes sharper than I'd seen in months. She led me to the living room, sat me down, and pulled a plain white envelope from between the cushions of her armchair. "I know what Mark was trying to do," she said simply. "I signed papers without reading them properly because I thought he was helping. But after you left that day at the lawyer's, I started paying more attention." I opened the envelope and found a fresh packet of documents. Her will, revised again, my name restored alongside a handwritten note in her tidy cursive. "Thank you for looking out for me when I didn't see the danger. You will always have a place in my life." Tears blurred my vision as she squeezed my hand. "Family isn't just about blood," she said softly. "It's about who stands by you when others are trying to take what isn't theirs." Mark's shadow still haunted the edges of our family gatherings, and not all wounds healed. But in that moment, the question of my place in her life, and in her heart, was answered completely.